Willa Freeman adjusted the strap of her satin dress and tried not to look like the only person in the ballroom who had come alone. She hadn't planned on attending this wedding solo. Her plus one had bailed at the last minute with a weak excuse and even weaker timing. But she couldn't say no to her childhood friend's big day, so here she was standing awkwardly beside the champagne tower, pretending she wasn't very much alone. The room radiated opulence, glittering chandeliers, a string quartet playing near the marble staircase, and guests in designer gowns and tuxedos laughing like they all belonged to the same elite world. Willa didn't. She was a florist, not a socialite. She'd spent the morning delivering bouquets, not choosing between yachts. She took a sip of champagne and scanned the crowd for a familiar face. That's when someone brushed her elbow. "Sorry," a deep voice said, smooth but distracted. Didn't mean to, she turned and looked right into the sharp green eyes of the man beside her. He was tall, clean-shaven, and dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit with a black tie that probably cost more than her rent. "It's fine," she said, giving him a polite smile. "I'm Quinn Langston," he said, sticking a hand out like they were at a corporate mixer, not a wedding reception. Willa Freeman." "Nice to meet you, Willa Freeman. You here with the bride's side or groom's?" "Bride, we grew up together, you?" He hesitated. "Groom's side, kind of." "I don't really know anyone here that well," she raised a brow, "so we're both kind of floating." "Exactly," he gave her a sheepish shrug. "I was dragged here by my business partner." He disappeared somewhere between cocktail hour and the speeches. "Well," she said, holding out her champagne flute, "cheers to being the randoms at a wedding." He tapped his glass against hers. "To the randoms." They ended up eating dinner together at a round table full of strangers too busy with their phones to talk. Conversation between Willa and Quinn flowed easily. He was surprisingly funny, and he actually listened when she spoke. He asked about her flower shop like he genuinely cared, not like he was just filling silence. "So you're a florist?" he asked, slicing into his filet mignon. "Is it as chaotic as I imagine?" "Worse," she said, laughing. "You'd be amazed what people expect you to do with 2 hours and a handful of roses," he nodded. "I respect that. I can barely keep my houseplants alive." "You have houseplants?" "No, that was a lie." She laughed again, and he grinned, looking slightly less guarded than when they'd first met. "What do you do?" she asked. He paused, twirling his fork between his fingers. "Investments, finance, boring stuff." Willa tilted her head. "You don't sound sure." "That's because I'm not. I've been in it for a long time. Lately I've been thinking maybe I want something different." "Like what?" He looked down at his plate, then back at her. "I don't know, something that feels real." There was a strange vulnerability in his voice, like he wasn't used to saying things like that out loud. Something about it made Willa's chest tighten a little. After dinner, the dance floor opened. The bride and groom swayed under the soft glow of fairy lights, and Willa watched them, smiling. "Do you dance?" Quinn asked. She blinked. Not well, good." "Then we'll match." He held out his hand, and she stared at it for a second before slipping hers into his. His palm was warm, his grip steady. She let him lead her into the crowd and tried not to think about how good it felt to be close to someone again. They danced through 2 songs, then 3. Quinn wasn't a great dancer, but he made her laugh, and that was better than any perfect step. "You know," he said as the 4th song started, "I almost didn't come tonight." "Why did you?" He looked at her for a long moment. "I think I was supposed to meet you." She rolled her eyes playfully. "That's a terrible line." "Maybe, but I meant it." Her heart thumped. There was something in the way he said it, quiet, honest, that made her feel like the room had gone still for a second. Eventually, the music slowed and they stepped off the floor. He walked her to the edge of the garden terrace where lanterns flickered in the warm night breeze. "I should probably head out soon," Willa said, glancing at the time. "I'll walk you out," he offered quickly, like he didn't want her to go alone, or maybe just didn't want her to go. They walked side by side through the marble hall, not saying much. At the front steps, her rideshare hadn't arrived yet, so they waited beneath the awning. "I had a really good time tonight," she said. "Me too," Quinn said. "I don't usually talk this much to strangers." She smiled. "I don't usually dance with them." "I'd like to see you again," Willa hesitated. She wasn't sure what this was, just a wedding night flirtation or something more, but the way he looked at her didn't feel temporary. "Okay," she said softly. "I'd like that." His eyes crinkled at the corners. "Tomorrow," she nodded. "Tomorrow." Quinn watched her car pull away, hands in his pockets, heart pounding harder than it had in a long time. He didn't know what this was yet, but something about Willa felt right. He'd lived in a world full of money, pressure, and strategy. But standing next to her, everything had felt simple. He didn't know that this woman he'd just met, this florist with the loud laugh and kind eyes, was about to knock his perfectly ordered life upside down. And he definitely didn't know that in just a few weeks, he'd be down on one knee with a diamond in his pocket. Ready to ask her to be his wife, Willa stood outside her shop the next morning, holding a paper cup of lukewarm coffee, staring at the delivery van that hadn't shown up. Again. "I swear, if Marcus forgot the orchids one more time," she muttered under her breath, pulling her cardigan tighter around her. The morning air still held a chill, and she hadn't exactly slept well. Her mind had replayed every moment from the wedding, especially the way Quinn had looked at her when he said he wanted to see her again. As if on cue, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. Not a delivery van. Definitely not Marcus. The passenger window rolled down, and there he was, hair slightly tousled, a pair of sunglasses resting on his collar. "Morning," Quinn said, resting his arm casually on the door. "I figured out how to find you," she blinked. "You stalked me." "I prefer to think of it as resourceful charm. You mentioned owning a flower shop. I Googled." Willa tilted her head. "You really showed up the next day." "I said tomorrow, didn't I?" He stepped out of the car and glanced up at the hand-painted sign above the door. "Sun and Stem." "Nice name." "Thanks," she said, still trying to process the fact that this man, who clearly wasn't used to waiting on sidewalks, had just appeared outside her very unglamorous storefront. "I figured you might be working, so I brought backup." He reached back into the car, pulled out a white-to-go bag, and handed it to her. "Egg and chive croissant. That's a gamble. I had no idea what you liked. And a fresh vanilla latte, because no one should drink whatever that is." She stared at the bag in her hands, then up at him. "You brought me breakfast." "Well, I couldn't start our second first date without food." He gave a quick glance past her toward the shop's interior. "Is this a bad time?" "I mean, it's a flower shop. There's no such thing as a good time," he grinned. "Perfect. Can I come in?" Willa hesitated, then nodded once. "Don't touch anything that looks fragile." Inside, the air was thick with the scent of peonies and eucalyptus. Buckets lined the walls, filled with blooms in varying stages of arrangement. A half-finished arch of baby's breath and roses hung from the ceiling, supported by a precarious ladder and a prayer. Quinn looked around slowly, taking it in with a kind of reverence she hadn't expected. "This is yours?" he asked. "Every last petal." She set the bag on the counter and peeled off her cardigan. "You're either brave or insane showing up here. It's chaos during wedding season." He leaned against the edge of the counter, watching her pull on gloves and grab a pair of floral shears. "So is it always like this? Or do you occasionally get a quiet Tuesday? If I'm lucky, I get 15 minutes without something wilting or someone calling in a panic because their maid of honor changed her mind about everything." He laughed, then walked over to a nearby display of sunflowers. "Do you ever get tired of it?" She paused. "Sometimes, but then I'll finish an installation and see the bride cry because it's exactly what she imagined when she was 10. That's what makes it worth it." Quinn looked at her, then really looked, and something about his expression shifted. "You're good at this," he said quietly. She blinked at him. "Nobody's ever said that without being my mom. I'm not your mom. Could have fooled me with the unsolicited breakfast." He chuckled, then gestured to a stack of empty vases. "Can I help?" She raised an eyebrow. "You want to help with flower prep?" "I've done worse things for worse reasons." Willa shrugged and handed him a small bundle of tulips. "Fine, strip the leaves from the bottom third, don't snap the stems, and if you ruin them, I'm charging you." He took the flowers delicately. "Noted." They worked side by side for the next hour, Quinn surprisingly focused, asking questions about flower types and design rules. Every now and then, she'd glance at him, this man with pressed cuffs and polished shoes. carefully peeling foliage from tulips like he'd been doing it his whole life. "So," she said as she filled a vase with water, "what's your actual job? Because I know finance isn't the whole story." He didn't answer right away, choosing instead to line his tulips on the table. "I run a firm," he finally said, "investment and acquisitions. We buy struggling companies and restructure them. Sometimes we rebuild, sometimes we liquidate," she frowned. "So you're the guy who decides if people keep their jobs or not," he met her eyes. "Yeah, that's the part I don't like. Why do it then? Because I'm good at it. And because when I do it right, I can save something important." She nodded slowly. "That's a better answer than I expected. Low bar, realistic bar." They shared a small smile, and for a moment there was a quiet comfort between them, like they'd been doing this for years. Then the front bell jingled and Willa's assistant, Tasha, walked in, arms loaded with boxes. "Oh," she said, freezing mid-step. "You've got company." Quinn straightened and offered a hand. "I'm Quinn." Tasha raised an eyebrow at Willa, then shook his hand. "You're not the delivery guy." "No," he said. "Hopefully better looking." "Debatable," Tasha replied, dropping the boxes by the register. "Willa, the McAllister centerpiece order just doubled. Apparently they invited more people than they thought." Willa groaned. "Of course they did." Tasha leaned closer and whispered, "Want me to get rid of him?" Willa glanced at Quinn, who was carefully placing finished tulips in a bucket, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened. "No," she said. "He's not getting in the way." Tasha gave her a knowing look before heading to the back. Quinn looked up. "Everything okay? Just a Monday," Willa said. He wiped his hands on a towel. "I should let you get back to it." "You could stay," she said before she could think better of it. He smiled, not smug, not arrogant, just quietly pleased. "I'd like that." As the day rolled on, he stayed. He helped organize stems, carried crates, and even managed not to knock over a single vase. When he finally left, he didn't ask for another date. He didn't need to. They both knew it was already happening. Willa adjusted the strap of her camera bag and scanned the sea of white chairs and towering centerpieces on the rooftop garden. The McAllister wedding had turned into a beast of an event, and she was here to make sure every last bloom held up under the late summer heat. "I'm telling you," Tasha muttered behind her, "if this bride adds one more last-minute request, I'm going to fake a fainting spell and crawl under the dessert table." Willa laughed under her breath, but her focus shifted as her eyes caught movement near the far edge of the terrace. Quinn. He wasn't in a suit today. Instead, he wore a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled neatly to his elbows, dark pants, and a pair of sunglasses tucked into the front of his shirt. He stood near one of the servers, scanning the setup like he belonged there. "Why is he here?" Tasha asked, narrowing her eyes. Willa didn't answer right away. She felt her pulse jump, which was ridiculous. 3 days had passed since their spontaneous flower shop workday. He'd called once. She hadn't called back, not because she didn't want to. Because she didn't know what she wanted. "I have no idea," she finally said. Quinn spotted her and started walking over. Tasha muttered something about needing to check the hydrangeas and disappeared with impressive speed. "Hey," he said, stopping in front of her. "You're hard to track down." "I'm working," she said, motioning toward the massive floral arch behind her. "I noticed. It's stunning." She nodded once, then tilted her head. "Why are you here, Quinn?" He looked around before answering. "I invested in the McAllister family's media startup last year. Their son invited me. I wasn't going to come until I heard from the planner you were handling the flowers. You're stalking me again." "I'm showing up," he said. "There's a difference." Willa folded her arms. "We barely know each other." "That's why I'm showing up," she hesitated. "You don't have to chase me. I'm not a prize." "I'm not chasing," he said, voice quieter now. "I'm just showing up in case you want to be caught." Her throat went dry, but before she could answer, the planner waved frantically from across the garden. "I have to hang the aisle garlands," she said. He nodded. "Need an extra set of hands?" "No," she said quickly. "Then after a pause, maybe." He followed her without another word. Hours passed in a blur of last-minute changes, wind gusts, and one near-catastrophic incident involving a tablecloth, a cake, and a small child with jam-covered hands. Through it all, Quinn didn't leave. He moved chairs, held ladders, even untangled a mess of fairy lights with the patience of someone doing a puzzle on a rainy afternoon. As the ceremony began, Willa stood to the side, watching the bride walk the aisle. She barely registered the words. Her mind kept drifting to the man beside her, now standing with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the vows with a kind of stillness that didn't match the man she thought she'd met that first night. When the couple kissed and the crowd erupted, he leaned toward her. Weddings always make me think too much. About what? About how easy it is to want something when you see it done right. She looked up at him. You think this is right? Two families who hired a planner to reorder the seating chart 4 times and almost canceled the rehearsal because the bride's aunt didn't like the shade of the menu cards. I think, he said. When someone says yes to you in front of 100 people, that's something real. Doesn't matter how many candles are on the table. She didn't know what to say to that, so she didn't say anything at all. Later, under the canopy of lights strung between rooftop beams, Willa leaned against the service bar, sipping seltzer and watching Quinn speak to a woman in a navy cocktail dress. He didn't look like he was flirting. He looked like he was answering business questions. Still, something in her stomach twisted. She turned away and busied herself with rearranging one of the reception table centerpieces. The roses had shifted slightly. Nothing was wrong, but it gave her something to do. Is it terrible, she heard Quinn say behind her, that I'm relieved to escape that conversation by pretending I needed to check on a hydrangea? She didn't turn around. You didn't pretend, that one's wilting. He moved to stand beside her. Let me take you to dinner. She looked at him. Another dinner, this time planned, not wedding leftovers, not between deliveries, just us, somewhere that doesn't smell like eucalyptus and stress. She exhaled slowly. What is this, Quinn, really? Because I don't do casual and I don't do temporary. I don't want temporary, he said. That's the problem. She finally turned to face him. You don't even know me. I know I want to. She started to speak, but a shout rang out across the rooftop. A waiter had knocked over a tray of glasses, and the sharp sound of shattering crystal broke the moment. Willa stepped back. I have to get back to work. He didn't follow her this time. He just nodded and let her go. The next day, she found an envelope beneath the flower shop's front door. No name, just a location written in looping black ink. She stood in front of the address that evening, staring at the massive wrought iron gate of a building she'd never seen before. A doorman greeted her and opened the door without asking her name. Inside, a private rooftop terrace glowed with soft lanterns. A single table was set near the edge, overlooking the skyline. Quinn stood beside it, holding 2 glasses of wine. I wasn't sure you'd come, he said. I wasn't either. I figured if I made it impossible to say no. She crossed her arms. You bribed a doorman. I bribed too. Just in case. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. This is a lot. I'm a lot, he said, but I promise you'll never have to wonder where you stand with me. She looked at the table, the skyline, the flickering candles, then back at him. Then let's eat. He held out a chair for her, and for the first time since she met him, Willa felt the ground settle beneath her feet. Dinner wasn't perfect. The risotto was slightly overcooked, and the wind kept tugging at the linen napkins, but none of it mattered. Because when he reached across the table and took her hand, there was no pretense, only clarity. Willa stared at the open doorway in front of her, senses still adjusting to the quiet hush of the penthouse beyond. Quinn hadn't said much when he invited her, just that he wanted her to see where he lived. Not in the way men usually meant it. This wasn't a lead-in, it was something else entirely, something serious. He stood beside her, coat in hand but not rushing her. The elevator doors slid shut behind them and she stepped inside. The penthouse was floor-to-ceiling glass, with wide open space and restrained, elegant design. It was tastefully masculine deep grays, warm woods, and a few modern pieces that looked more like art than furniture. But what caught her attention wasn't the sleekness of the place. It was the wall of photos near the piano, black and white shots in silver frames, some clearly decades old, a woman laughing as she leaned over a chessboard. A younger Quinn standing beside a man who looked nothing like him but had the same guarded eyes. A dog sprawled across a leather couch with one paw hanging off the edge. "You live here?" she asked, taking a step closer to the wall of images. "Since I was 28, he said. "Bought the building with a partner when we were still pretending we didn't care about views." She scanned the photos slowly. "Is this your mom?" Foster mom. She kept taking in teenagers long after she hit retirement. "That's her in her favorite chair. She used to yell at me for bringing work to dinner." Willa turned to him, surprised. "You were in foster care for a while, bounced around until her." He gave a small shrug. "By then, I was already pretty good at keeping people at arm's length." She looked back at the photos. "You don't talk about this." "I don't talk about a lot of things." Willa turned toward the window, letting the skyline fill her view. "Why me?" He stepped beside her, close but not touching. "Because you saw me before you knew anything else. Because when I showed up at your door with a kwasa, you didn't care what I did for a living. You handed me tulips and made me work for it." She exhaled. "You're not what I expected. I'm not sure I am either," he said. "But I know what I want now." She looked at him, heart thudding. "And what's that? You." He didn't reach for her. He just held her gaze like he was giving her space to walk away if she wanted. "I didn't think people like you believed in things like this," she said. "I didn't. Until I met you." She didn't move. She didn't speak. But something changed in her face, something that unlocked, like a door creaking open after too long. Quinn reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small, square box. He didn't drop to one knee. He didn't make a scene. He just opened the lid and let her see it. A delicate ring, rose gold, with a Marquise diamond that shimmered like frost in morning light. "I know this is fast," he said, "but I've spent years building a life that never felt like mine. The first time it did was when I was stripping leaves off tulips in your shop." Her breath caught. "I don't need a long timeline to know what's real. I'm not asking for perfect. I'm asking for mornings where we trip over flower buckets and nights where we eat risotto that's a little too salty." Willa stared at him, eyes bright, voice low. "You're serious?" "I've never been more." She looked down at the ring, then back at him. "I don't need a ring to know what this is. I want you to have it anyway." She didn't touch the box. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him into a kiss that was soft at first, then deeper, like the answer had been building in her all along. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. "Yes," she whispered, "but only if we do the wedding our way. No crystal swans, no cousins I haven't seen since I was 5. "Deal," he said, voice rough. "But I'm still hiring a jazz quartet. You do that, and I'm wearing sneakers under my dress." He grinned and she laughed, and just like that something shifted, not the kind of shift that makes noise. The kind that settles into place with the quiet certainty of something that was always meant to be. 2 weeks later, they stood in a sun-drenched greenhouse filled with hanging ivy, string lights, and every bloom Willa had ever loved. Tasha officiated, barely holding back tears. There were only 20 guests, half of whom were foster siblings Quinn hadn't seen in years, and one very old woman who used to yell at him for skipping meals during finals. Willa wore a simple silk dress, no veil. Quinn wore a navy suit, no tie. They wrote their own vows, no microphones, no fanfare. When he slid the ring onto her finger, Willa didn't need to look at it to feel the weight of what it meant. Later that night, he carried her across the threshold of a private villa on the Amalfi Coast, a surprise he'd arranged quietly. The view stretched out into darkness, but she could hear waves crashing somewhere below. "You bought this place?" she asked, stunned. "Leased it. For now." She turned to him, barefoot on the marble, hair damp from the evening air. "You're not going to stop, are you?" "Not unless you ask me to." She laughed and launched herself into his arms, wrapping her legs around his waist and kissing him until neither of them could remember what day it was. They didn't need 1,000 guests or a 12-piece band. They had each other, the stars, and a future they were finally ready to step into together. Willa stood barefoot on the warm stone floor, peering out through the open terrace doors as the sun painted the horizon in streaks of coral and gold. The scent of lemon trees drifted on the breeze, mixing with sea salt and something sweet she couldn't quite place. The villa was still calm in a way that felt earned. From behind her, the soft rustle of cotton sheets and the creak of the bed reached her ears. "You're up early." Quinn's voice was low, still heavy with sleep. She turned to find him propped against the headboard, hair tousled, one hand resting behind his head. His wedding ring gleamed faintly in the light. "You always said you weren't a morning person," she said, walking back toward the bed and climbing onto it with her legs folded beneath her. "Today doesn't count," he replied as he reached for her hand. "Today, I just want to look at you." She rolled her eyes, but her smile gave her away. "You're getting bolder. I married you. I'm allowed." They sat in silence for a beat, the kind that didn't ask to be filled with words, the kind that simply was. "I got an email this morning," Quinn said, his thumb brushing over the inside of her wrist. Willa lifted an eyebrow. "That sounds dangerously close to bringing work into our honeymoon." "It's not that kind of email. It's from a guy I used to mentor. He's taking over the Langston deal in Berlin, said I made the right call passing it to him." She leaned back on her elbows. "You're stepping back. I already did." "I'm not going to vanish from the business completely, but I'm not doing 20-hour days anymore. I've spent enough time building empires for other people. I want to build something that actually matters to me now." Her gaze softened. "And what's that exactly?" He turned fully toward her, knees bent, expression open. "You, us, a life that doesn't revolve around quarterly margins and merger deadlines." Willa tilted her head. "That sounds a little like a dream." "It is," he said. "But this time, it's one I get to live in." Later that day, they wandered through the narrow coastal streets, hand in hand, ducking into a small cafe tucked beneath a stone archway. It was quiet, no cameras, no business calls, no obligations. Just two people, deeply in love, navigating a world that had finally slowed down for them. Willa paused in front of a stall selling hand-painted ceramics. She picked up a plate with a lemon motif and ran her fingers over the glaze. "I want to start something," she said, eyes still on the dish. Quinn looked at her, curiosity evident. "Something?" "A line, not just wedding florals. I've always wanted to design pieces that live longer than a week." "How can I help?" She turned to face him. "You already have." They brought home a crate of those ceramics, not for show. For the shelves of her new store, a second space she opened in the city, combining florals with small batch artisan goods. It wasn't about expansion, it was about expression. She called it STEM and Story. Quinn kept his promise. He scaled back. He turned down a tech deal that would have tripled his portfolio, but stolen another year of his life. Instead, he invested in a community project. Willa introduced him to a greenhouse initiative that trained at-risk teens in sustainable horticulture. It reminded him of the woman who raised him, and it reminded Willa of why she fell in love with him. One evening, 6 months later, they hosted a dinner at their home. The long table out on the terrace was crowded with friends, found family, and the kind of laughter that echoed into the night. The vines had grown thicker over the beams, and strings of light swayed in the breeze. Tasha clinked her glass and raised it. "To the woman who used to threaten me with garden shears and the man who somehow convinced her to take a day off," she said. "You two are impossible. But you're impossibly right together." Willa leaned into Quinn's side, resting her head against his shoulder. He kissed her temple, his arm wrapping around her waist. That night, after everyone had gone and the candles had burned low, Willa stood in the kitchen rinsing glasses while Quinn dried them. "You know," she said, "for a man who once claimed he couldn't keep a houseplant alive, you've gotten remarkably good at nurturing things." He glanced at her, drying the stem of a wineglass. "Funny, I was thinking the same about you." She turned the faucet off and faced him fully. "We made this. Not just the business, this life." Quinn set the glass down and pulled her into his arms. "Let's keep building it." Years passed, the business grew, the city changed. But the quiet moments remained: early morning walks to the bakery, late-night brainstorming sessions on the balcony, hands entwined in the garden behind their home. They didn't chase perfection. They chased joy. And in doing so, they found everything they'd ever hoped for. One spring evening, Willa stood barefoot in their backyard, watching the roses bloom along the fence Quinn had built for her. He stepped out onto the patio, holding a small bundle wrapped in soft linen. She turned and smiled as he handed it to her. Inside was a sketchbook. On the first page, in neat, deliberate handwriting, were the words for the next chapter. Whatever it becomes, she looked up at him, heart full. You still surprise me. I hope I never stop. They kissed as the wind rustled through the trees and the sound of laughter drifted from inside the house. Their story didn't need grand finales or final acts, just the knowledge that no matter what came next, they would face it hand in hand. Because love, true love, wasn't found in the flowers or the fortunes. It was built, one moment at a time, in the life they chose to create together, forever.